A restaurant owner kicked out a black couple, laughing as he humiliated them in front of a packed house. Minutes later, his smirk vanished when their true identities were revealed, and his entire world came crashing down. The night shift at Titan Enterprises headquarters was supposed to be quiet. A few employees working late, security guards monitoring cameras, and janitors cleaning the marble floors. No one paid much attention to the people who worked behind the scenes. They were invisible. And that's exactly what James Thornton, the CEO of Titan Enterprises, was counting on. Dressed in a navy blue security uniform, James adjusted his cap and glanced at his reflection in the glass doors before stepping inside. His usual expensive suits and commanding presence had been stripped away. No one would recognize him tonight. He wasn't the powerful billionaire who built this company from the ground up. He was just another nameless security guard starting his shift. The reception area was nearly empty, except for one guard slouched behind the desk, scrolling through his phone. He didn't even glance up as James walked past. The cameras above hummed softly, capturing everything, but no one was really watching. James had personally arranged it. Tonight, he wanted to observe without interference. As he made his way down the dimly lit hallway, he noticed a few employees still at their desks. One man in an expensive suit laughed loudly at something on his screen, while a younger intern nervously typed on her laptop. She was clearly exhausted, but her superior didn't seem to care. James reached the main security booth. Inside, 3 guards sat around a small table, drinking coffee and chatting. They barely acknowledged him. One of them, a broad-shouldered man with a thick mustache, finally looked up and smirked. "New guy?" he asked, eyeing James with disinterest. James nodded. "Yeah, just started tonight." The mustached guard chuckled. "Welcome to the graveyard shift. Hope you don't mind being ignored." James just smiled. That was exactly what he wanted. As he settled into his post, a young janitor walked past, pushing a cleaning cart. He hesitated for a moment, then gave James a second look. "Hey, you look kind of familiar," the janitor murmured, narrowing his eyes. James tensed for a split second, but then he chuckled and shrugged. "I just have one of those faces." The janitor nodded slowly, but there was something in his expression. Curiosity, maybe even suspicion. He opened his mouth as if to say something, then changed his mind and continued down the hallway. James exhaled, relaxing back into his chair. What he would discover tonight would change everything. But for now, he was just another shadow in the building he owned, watching and waiting. James had only been on shift for an hour when he started to see the cracks in his company's foundation. The late-night employees treated security guards and janitors like they didn't exist, walking past them without a glance, leaving their trash on desks as if expecting someone else to clean up after them. But it wasn't until he encountered Richard Caldwell that things truly started to unravel. Richard was the company's chief operating officer, second only to James himself. A tall, imposing man with a sharp suit and sharper tongue, Richard had built a reputation for being ruthless in the boardroom. But tonight, there was no boardroom, no cameras, no audience, just a security guard standing in his way. James was making his usual rounds when Richard stormed out of the executive lounge, phone pressed against his ear. His voice was sharp, irritated. "I don't care if the numbers don't add up. Fix them before the morning meeting," he snapped before ending the call. His eyes landed on James, and for a moment, they flickered with mild confusion. Then, immediate dismissal. "Hey, you," Richard barked, pointing at him. "You're the new guy, right? What's your name?" James kept his expression neutral. "Jim." Richard scoffed. "Right. Listen, Jim, I need you to do something useful. Go downstairs and bring up a bottle of Macallan from my office. Top shelf, Left cabinet. James tilted his head slightly. That's an executive office, sir. I don't think I'm supposed to. Richard's expression darkened. And I don't think I asked for your opinion. He took a step closer, towering over James. Your job is to listen and obey, not question. So unless you want your first night to be your last, I suggest you move. The room had gone silent. A few employees nearby had stopped what they were doing, watching the scene unfold. No one spoke up. No one intervened. James could feel the weight of their indifference pressing against him. This wasn't just about a bottle of whiskey. This was about power. About a man so comfortable in his authority that he thought he could treat people like servants without consequence. Slowly, deliberately, James nodded. Of course, sir. Richard smirked, satisfied, and turned back toward the lounge. James, however, wasn't heading for the elevator. Instead, he moved toward the security booth, where a bank of monitors displayed live footage from around the building. He leaned over the console, scanning through the feeds, looking for the right angle. There. The executive lounge camera, positioned just above the entrance. A perfect, unobstructed view of Richard Caldwell, ordering a security guard to break company policy. James straightened, his mind working quickly. Richard thought he was untouchable, that no one would dare question him. But he had no idea who he had just humiliated. And soon, he would regret it. James didn't go downstairs to fetch Richard's whiskey. Instead, he stayed in the security booth, watching. The camera feed showed Richard lounging back on the expensive leather couch, laughing with two other executives. A few employees who were still working late moved past the lounge, eyes down, pretending not to hear the boisterous conversation inside. James could hear them clearly through the audio feed. That new security guy? Richard chuckled, swirling the drink in his glass. Completely useless. These low-level grunts never question anything. Just a bunch of warm bodies filling uniforms. Another executive, a balding man in his 50s, smirked. You'd think corporate would hire someone with a brain, at least. But I guess as long as they can hold a flashlight and push buttons, they're good enough. Laughter filled the room. James clenched his jaw. These were the men running his company. Men who should have been leaders, setting an example. Instead, they treated people like disposable tools, and no one challenged them. As James stepped out of the security booth, he spotted the young janitor from earlier. The kid had been mopping the floors, but now he stood frozen, staring toward the executive lounge. His hands were clenched around the mop handle, his expression tight with anger. James approached him. Something wrong? The janitor glanced at him, hesitated, then shook his head. Nah, just tired of hearing the same crap every night. James narrowed his eyes. Every night? The janitor let out a bitter laugh. Man, if you think this is bad, you should have been here last week. They made one of the night shift assistants cry, called her dead weight because she couldn't finish some report fast enough. He shook his head. They treat everyone like this, but no one says anything. No one can afford to. James felt something shift inside him. He had come here to observe, to see the truth with his own eyes. But now he had seen enough. The elevator doors dinged open. Two more executives stepped out. One of them, the head of HR, laughing at something on his phone. As they passed, the janitor instinctively moved aside, pressing himself against the wall. They didn't even glance at him. James took a slow breath. It was time. He turned and walked straight toward the executive lounge. The moment he stepped inside, the laughter died down. Richard looked up, annoyed. Where the hell is my... James pulled a small black device from his pocket and placed it on the table between them. A company-issued security recorder. He pressed play. Their voices filled the room. Every arrogant, demeaning word they had spoken in the last 15 minutes played back in crystal-clear audio. The color drained from Richard's face. The balding executive swallowed hard. James let it play for a few more seconds before pausing the recording. Then, in the same calm, steady voice he had used all night, he spoke. "That useless grunt you were talking about?" He pulled off the security cap, running a hand through his hair. "Turns out, he owns this company." Silence. Heavy. Suffocating. Richard's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The two executives near the door started shifting uncomfortably, inching away as if they could escape the fallout. The janitor was still standing outside, eyes wide, gripping the mop like it was the only thing keeping him upright. James folded his arms. "I came here tonight to see how my employees are treated when no one's watching. And I have to say," he let his gaze sweep across the room, his voice dangerously calm, "I'm disgusted." Richard finally found his voice. "James, sir, this is all just a misunderstanding. We were just what?" James cut him off, his tone sharp. "Just belittling people you think are beneath you? Just abusing your position?" He shook his head. "Tell me, Richard, how many other employees have you humiliated? How many times has this happened?" The executive's jaw clenched. For the first time, he looked truly afraid. James exhaled, then turned toward the door. "Gather the entire night staff. Now." Within minutes, the lounge was packed with security guards, janitors, and employees who had been working late. Some looked nervous, others confused. But as soon as they saw James, standing tall, no longer playing the part of a security guard, whispers spread like wildfire. James raised a hand, and the room fell silent. "I built this company from nothing," he said, his voice steady but firm. "And I promised myself that no matter how big we got, every person here would be treated with respect. Clearly, that hasn't been happening." He glanced toward Richard and his group. "That ends tonight." Richard swallowed hard. The janitor, still standing by the doorway, looked like he was holding his breath. James took one last look around the room. He had seen the truth. And now, it was time for consequences. The hush that followed Richard's removal was thick with unspoken words. The power dynamics in the room had shifted so suddenly that no one knew how to react. Employees, some still gripping their coffee cups, others frozen mid-step, looked at James with a mixture of awe and uncertainty. James let the silence settle before speaking. "This isn't just about one man," he said, his voice steady but firm. "It's about a culture that has been allowed to grow in this company, one that values status over character, that measures worth by a title rather than the work a person does." His gaze swept the room, landing on faces that had spent too many nights unseen, unheard. "I won't allow it." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some exchanged glances, as if waiting for someone to challenge him, but no one did. James took a breath, then turned toward the janitor, the same young man who had hesitated before recognizing something familiar in his face. "What's your name?" The janitor blinked, caught off guard. Marcus, sir." James nodded. "Marcus, tell me, how long have you worked here?" Marcus shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the other workers before answering. "A little over a year." James studied him. "And in that year, have you ever seen an executive treat a janitor or a security guard with respect?" Marcus swallowed hard. "No, sir." That one answer carried more weight than any speech James could have given. It was the truth, spoken without embellishment, without fear, and it hung in the air like a challenge. James turned back to the employees, his voice carrying a new edge. "That ends tonight." He looked toward the remaining executives, the ones who had sat beside Richard and laughed at his jokes. They were still standing, stiff-backed, unsure of their place in this new reality. James gestured toward the door. If any of you believe you deserve your positions more than the people who actually make this company run, feel free to follow Richard out. No one moved. James held their gaze for a moment longer before addressing the entire room. There will be changes, and some of them will be uncomfortable. But I promise you this: if you do your job with integrity, if you treat the people around you with respect, you will always have a place here. A slow, hesitant nod from one employee, then another. The tension that had gripped the room was beginning to ease, replaced by something else, something unfamiliar. Hope. James let the moment settle before offering a small, knowing smile. Now, I believe there's still work to be done. The employees slowly began to disperse, murmuring to one another as they returned to their tasks. The energy in the room was different, lighter. James exhaled, running a hand through his hair. He had come here tonight to uncover the truth, and now that he had, he was going to make damn sure things changed. For good. The aftermath of Richard's downfall rippled through the company like a shockwave. By morning, every employee had heard what had happened during the night shift. The whispers in the hallways, the stunned looks exchanged over coffee. Titan Enterprises had been shaken to its core. But James wasn't done yet. By noon, an internal memo had been sent out. It was simple, direct. Effective immediately, a full audit of leadership practices will be conducted. No one is exempt. If you have witnessed or experienced workplace misconduct, your voice will be heard. The message was clear. Silence would no longer be the company's policy. That afternoon, James walked through the office, not as a distant CEO, but as someone fully present. He stopped by the janitorial team, shaking hands, thanking them for their work. He visited the security booth, personally introducing himself to every guard. The people who had once been invisible now stood taller, no longer reduced to the background. Meanwhile, Richard's office had been cleared out, his nameplate removed. The executives who had sided with him were now treading carefully, uncertain of their own futures. Some had already submitted their resignations, knowing that their old ways had no place in this new era. James wasn't interested in revenge. He didn't need to humiliate anyone. Richard had done that to himself. What mattered now was rebuilding, restoring the values that should have been there all along. As he made his way back toward the security booth, he spotted Marcus, the young janitor from the night before. Their eyes met, and this time, Marcus didn't look away. "Sir," he said, clearing his throat, "I just wanted to say, thanks." James smiled. "Don't thank me, Marcus. Just promise me one thing." Marcus nodded. "Anything. If you ever see this company slipping back into old habits, speak up." Marcus grinned, the confidence in his stance, something new. "You got it." James nodded. This was just the beginning. That evening, as James stood in his office overlooking the city skyline, he reflected on everything that had happened in the past 24 hours. He had walked into his own company as a nobody and left as the CEO once again, but with a clearer vision than ever before. Change wasn't about policies or corporate statements. It was about people, about making sure that no one, no matter their position, was made to feel small. A soft knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. It was Marcus. "Sorry to bother you, sir," he said, hesitating for a moment. "I just wanted to say, last night, it wasn't just about Richard. It was about all of us. And knowing that someone up here actually cares, it changes things." James studied him for a moment before nodding. Then let's make sure it stays that way. As Marcus left, James exhaled, a small smile forming. His disguise had come off, but what he had discovered would stay with him forever. Now, let me ask you, have you ever been underestimated? Have you ever seen someone's true colors when they thought no one important was watching? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your stories. And if you want more eye-opening stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next, because sometimes the most powerful people in the room are the ones you least expect.